The WHO team has concluded its joint research with the Chinese colleagues in Wuhan. The research was highly anticipated as the world sought answers to the origin of COVID-19 virus. The joint team left no stone unturned, many say, as they visited the Huanan Seafood Market, Wuhan Jinyintan Hospital, and the Wuhan Virology Lab. Right before they left Wuhan, I spoke to Peter Daszak, a zoologist and a member of the WHO China research team. He explains what his team has ruled out and what still needs further research. Take a look. Peter, good to see you, finally.
Great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very good. And you are up and running even in the middle of the night. I'm really impressed.
Well, we've been flat out now for months, so I'm just keeping going.
Let me ask you several questions. Many people have in mind. The report was very long and very professional, but to layman's ears, we want you to have some direct answers if possible. So Peter, is it a spillover from a lab?
The evidence says extremely unlikely. So, and that was a unanimous opinion on both the China and the WHO side. So I think that pretty much tells us it's not worth continuing that pathway of thought.
Secondly, what about the Huanan Seafood Market? Do we know now exactly what spread around the virus?
Yeah, we don't really know exactly what happened yet, but what we do know is there was a very significant event at the Huanan Seafood Market with a lot of infected people. There is evidence that the virus was all spreading in the community at a greater rate than we thought previously. So obviously the outbreak started and was always spreading by the time we got to Huanan. What's really important is that there's no evidence of substantial spread prior to December. So the event was then, it spread rapidly, and it kind of was an explosive event, and then it was discovered pretty quickly.
Did we find patient zero?
No, and we may never find patient zero. It could be an elderly person who died of pneumonia, and that might have been missed because people die of pneumonia, people get sick. So we may never get there, but we do know a lot more than we did 2 months ago.
How did they jump from animal to human?
Yeah, that's the really interesting question for me. And I, in this working group, we sort of split out into 3 sections, and I was the lead for the WHO team on animals and the environment. And I worked with my colleagues on the China side. I was very interested in this, and we don't know exactly, but there are some clues. One clue is that the market is bringing frozen products, meat, other products from around the world originally and from within China and within the region. Some of those products included meat from animals that we know have the capacity to be infected by coronaviruses. So there's a link,
like what kind of animals?
Well, I mean, we think it's ferret badgers, for instance, rabbits, both of which we know could harbor coronaviruses without us knowing about it. But also the frozen products, from other outbreaks in China, that frozen products can transmit, can allow the virus to be spread.
Peter, on the other hand, many of the raw materials you're working with actually are coming from your colleagues here in China. They support you with evidence and also the clues and also the information you're looking for. But is there much trust between your team and the Chinese counterpart you're working with? What kind of degrees of trust is the appropriate level?
Yeah, it's a really good point you're making there. All of the evidence is coming from China team, not just some of it, all of it.
Because none of those evidence could be copied later, right? I mean, you have to collect it at the moment when it happened.
Yeah, you have to go out there and do the work. And China was in the middle of a terrible outbreak. So what the scientists did, there were Chinese scientists coming into Wuhan, giving up months of their lives to do this work. I mean, I have great respect for what happened here. We met with leaders of the community. We met with real people who'd lost relatives, quite moving and emotionally touching experiences. I think there's a sense in Wuhan that I felt of almost post-traumatic shock.
Yeah.
They've been through so much, and now they're getting blamed. And I think that the emotion is noticeable. So he'll come in as foreigner to say, let's look at your data. Any scientist will tell you, when you've found something interesting and you want to publish it, you don't show it to other scientists because they're your competitors. Now, trust is critical. For me, it was not a problem. I happen to know many of the scientists on the other side because I've worked with Chinese scientists for 15 years, some of them very well. And we got on well, we had good, open, honest discussions, really got into every detail. But some of the other scientists who haven't been to China before, maybe a bit longer, but we had, by the end of it, we've got really good friends, new friends made, new colleagues, and a really deeper understanding. There has been a lot of openness, a lot of transparency.
Now, Peter, one of your friends is Shi Zhengli. Madam Shi is the head of the Wuhan Institute for Virology. There were a lot of rumors about her, a lot of rumors about her institute, and you were speaking out, in fact, about what you have noticed and what's your analysis. Tell me more about that. At the end of the trip, what are in your mind?
You know, I first heard about the rumors, and I want to say they're more than rumors. They're some very nasty activity. I heard about this very early on in the outbreak, that our colleagues in China were being attacked. They were being accused of designing a virus and spreading it. And we're getting death threats. And we wrote a letter to the Lancet, and a group of very important scientists that I know and that I talked to supported scientists in China who are fighting the outbreak. I mean, how outrageous that they're fighting an outbreak. They're being accused of causing an outbreak. So for my mind, it's obvious to me that the work that Shi Zhengli has done for all of her career is both excellent science and for the public good, to help people to try and predict and prevent pandemics. And I work with her on exactly that, and I still do. We've both through tough times. I've had my own conspiracy attacks in the US that are still going on today, every day. But we stick to our mission and our goals to find the source of these pandemics and try and stop them. And Madam Shi is a powerful and strong person, as well as a great scientist and a good friend. So it was a very important moment to see her again in person, to sit down with her, with the head of the laboratory and the head of the Institute of Virology and the other people around, with the colleagues from WHO. And I think really importantly, the world needs to know, scientists who I don't know on the WHO team ask their own questions directly to the people at WIV about some of these very tough issues, these very sensitive issues. And that will be reported in the report. There will be a transcript. And they voted, they had an opinion on whether it was a likely scenario after they looked at all those data. I didn't speak until they'd made their opinion known, and the whole room discussed it, the whole room made their opinion known, then I spoke. And it was a unanimous decision that this is an extremely unlikely event. So I do think that's a very significant finding. Some people will never support that, and they'll continue to promote these rumors and conspiracies. But these are scientists who know what they're doing, who've looked at a lab, who understand what goes on. And what we saw was a state-of-the-art facility doing good work.
When you say it was a unanimous vote, how did you guys vote? I want to know the situation then. And maybe our viewers also need to and deserve to know the situation, how people are expressing their ideas, how they took turn, and how would they voice a different opinion, and how that unanimous vote eventually was cast. What was going on there?
So we've been meeting in rooms here, conference rooms in this hotel, you know, 3 rows back, a lot of people in a room. And we've been talking about every possible pathway this virus could have taken, from a bat to a human, whether through an intermediate host, whether through a cold chain, whether through a lab. And we got into, in those discussions, all the details and sort of debated what is the evidence for and what is the evidence against. There is evidence against, there's no data that show that SARS-CoV-2 was in any lab in the world prior to the outbreak. The closest relative is not the same virus. There's no evidence of unusual clusters of disease around the Wuhan lab or in the staff of the Wuhan lab. So we went through a whole series of bits of information like that, and eventually people then said, well, in my opinion, it is not highly likely, possible, or even unlikely. It's extremely unlikely. And other people around the room gave their opinion too. Every single person said extremely unlikely, including myself.
Some still believe that WHO has to prove itself and so-called correct its mistakes. By the way, that was a phrase used by some. I'm not sure whether there's much credibility in that phrase either. But Peter, how is this team being assembled?
Yeah.
And were there any information before you set out for Beijing, for China, that would consider as interesting regarding what likely to be the result of the research?
WHO has done this many times. They have a unit within WHO called the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, GOAN. And that group has investigated Ebola outbreaks, Nipah virus outbreaks. They investigated the original SARS outbreak. In fact, one of the members of this team was on the original SARS outbreak, Dominic Dwyer investigation. So they're used to doing this. And what they do is they have a list of experts that sign on and say, in the case of an emergency, I will volunteer my time to help if you need my help. There'll be veterinarians, there'll be medics, there'll be epidemiologists, lab managers. So they sent a message out to that group and said, do you want to volunteer for this task? They also then made a wider search for people outside of that group that have expertise. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean, I think my expertise is pretty obvious. I've worked in China for 15 years on these very same viruses, coronaviruses from bats. I've worked with many of the people that need to be in the room to talk about that from China. So I'm kind of an obvious fit, but what they did is they pulled together a team of, for the people who volunteered, experts that made all the sides of the story fit together. They then wanted a team that would work well together, so the personality. And I've got to say, we are best friends, even after 28 days of lockdown. It's just been a really positive experience. Hard work. But that's how it works. That's how the WHO does their work. And I have intense respect for the WHO. WHO gets the same rumors that other scientists have been getting around this. They're not true. They're not real. It's an organization that has a limited budget that does really important, critical work to save people's lives. What could be more pure and important than that? And I think a very successful trip. The work will continue. We'll be meeting the minute we get back. I don't think it needs to prove itself any more than that, for sure.
Peter, what's the next stage of research? As we didn't find patient zero, we still don't know many of the crucial issues. I mean, it might take a very, very long time, as you may know, with your expertise, to know just a little bit more information in that regard. But what's the next step?
Well, the next step is to, first of all, we've got to produce a report so the world can see what we've done. In the meantime, we'll be continuing discussions with our colleagues and lining up the recommendations. We have ideas around the bat pathway. You know, do we need to go out and sample bats? Maybe not in China so much, but maybe in Southeast Asia, where even today there was a new virus from bats that's close to SARS coronavirus 2. So do we need to trace back from the market to the suppliers of the market, the products that went in there, so we can see if they were contaminated or if the people were infected? And there's a cold chain hypothesis. You know, we know that that's controversial, but there is good evidence from the outbreaks in Beijing and Qingdao and Dalian that this cold chain plays a role. So that needs to be tested. Go out and find out more information. If there were early cases in other countries, let's validate the tests that were done, check the data, and do more investigations. So there's a whole series of recommendations that will now begin. The work will begin, and we'll hope to find out more. We've come up with some early clues that are promising and quite exciting, Now we need to follow the leads and go further back.
You've been doing research for a long time about One Health. Some also call it conservation medicine. Tell me more about, with this outbreak, COVID-19, how much new information and direction does it provide to your work and your research?
Well, One Health is the concept of, the health of the environment, of the animals, and of the people are connected.
Yeah.
And if we just look at people's health and we don't think about animals and the environment, we may miss the key issue. SARS-CoV-2 clearly has an animal involvement because it probably comes from wildlife. It has an environmental involvement because it emerged through either some product supply chain, maybe through farms or through the travel network or the trade network. So we need to look at all of that and bring it all together. It's a true One Health project. But I just want to point out, some of the things that China did are directly beneficial to conservation. On February the 24th, China proposed to ban the wildlife trade for food and to close down the farms that raise domesticated wildlife is a big, important move. It's good for conservation, it's good for our health, it's good for the environment. And I think it shows leadership. And I think that now we need to look at the greater issues around the wildlife trade, even for food that we think might be harmless, but could carry this hidden danger of a pandemic in other countries. So there's a lot we can do, there's a lot we need to do, but we have taken some very significant first steps with COVID, and I welcome that.
For further investigation, or shall I say, trace origin, what is the exact plan now in terms of geography?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a role to play in looking in other countries. First of all, if there's a bat origin to this virus, it's quite likely it's going to be in Southeast Asia. So we need to go and find that and find out what the risk of a new virus is coming from bats into people. I think that it's possible that the cold chain from other countries plays a role. That needs to be looked at. So tracing back from that Huanan market, where the products that were coming into it came from, and just looking to see if it's possible that viruses could persist that way. It may not be true, but let's find out. I don't know how far we'll need to go across the world to do that, but we do need to follow the evidence. And just like any trace back, go back and you test, then you go further back, and maybe you reach a dead end. But I think there are some really important leads from this study. We need to follow them. And the reason we need to do that is if we can find out why this virus emerged, we can stop. And it's a lot better to prevent these pandemics than go through the suffering that we've gone through with this.
I talked to Richard Hatchett from CEPI. I talked to Peter Daszak, who co-discovered the Ebola virus, and many of them have been suggesting we are really in the danger of having a pandemic age, quote unquote, or pandemic time. Your take?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think this is debatable at all.
Yeah.
We've analyzed the trends in pandemics. We've analyzed the trends in new viruses coming out of wildlife and other animals, and they're rising year by year. We estimate there might be over 1 million viruses in wildlife that have the potential to infect us. So let's go out and find them. Let's get them, the sequences into a lab. Let's work on vaccines. Let's work with the communities around the world that are on the front line of pandemics, and that can include countries that China has good relationships with. We've talked about this before, a global virome project, an effort to understand what is out there on the planet that could become a risk. And that came up repeatedly from the China side, that we need to support these global efforts to really understand the risk.
At the end of the day, no matter how thoroughly the research is, there would always be voices suspicious of the way you work, your relationship with the Chinese side, whether the accurate or not the report, and whether further studies should be done. How are you going to face all of this? And probably personal attack, even more than you already experienced.
Well, I face it every day. And what I do is I just ignore. I mean, I'm not a politician. I'm a scientist. I'm here to understand the world around us for a valuable purpose. So that's what I'm going to do. I mean, that's my job. It always has been. Before people started attacking me, I was doing this work. While they're attacking me, I will do this work. And after they continue attacking me, I will do this work. I leave China with a certain sadness, you know, to when you work with colleagues like this for so long, you become, every time you leave a little bit of yourself there and you take a little bit with you. So I'm leaving with a certain sense of sadness, but a great sense of joy and pride that we did a good job,
Yes,
that we did what we came out to do, and we met with everybody we wanted to meet with. So thank you for doing that, China, and we will now carry on our work, and I look forward to the next steps.
And thank you, Peter. All the team members that you have on the team, please express our great appreciation for their support and help in tracing the virus in the world to make ourselves safer, all of us.